Okay, so in this video, we're going to be calculating a one-way ANOVA test in the TI-84 calculator. Now, you can't really do a two-way or a three-way ANOVA test in the calculator, but you can do a one-way ANOVA. Now, we're going to first have to enter the data for our test into the lists, and each of our subgroups within the test. So typically an ANOVA is done for 3 or more samples, so similar to a t-test, but instead of for 2 samples, we're doing it for 3 samples or 4 samples or so on. So before we can run the test, we need to enter the data into the lists. Each list, each subset should go in its own separate list. Now, to get to the lists, we're going to hit Stat, and then from the Edit screen, we're just going to hit Edit, and that's going to take us into our lists. And then for the data from our ANOVA test, we're going to enter that into each of our lists. So in this case, we would enter the data into list 1, and then group 2 into list 2, group 3 into list 3, and then group 4 into list 4. Now, the ANOVA does not require that the 4 subcategories or 4 treatments have identical numbers of values in them. They can have different values, but make sure that when you're entering this, particularly if the data is long, that you haven't skipped over any of the values. Now, once you have the data into the list, then you can conduct your hypothesis test. Now, remember that the hypothesis test for the ANOVA is that all the means are equal, and that the alternative is that at least one of the means is different. So when the data is entered into the calculator, you're going to hit Exit, so second quit to get out of that, and then select Stat, and then scroll over to the Test submenu. ANOVA is H on the list. I believe it's actually the very last thing on the list. So you're going to scroll down to that, or scroll up to that because it's a little faster to go up. And then the ANOVA is going to come up on the screen, and you're going to have to enter the lists that your original data for the ANOVA test is in. So second 1 will get you list 1, comma is above the 7 key. It's the key above the 7. And then second 2 for list 2, and then comma second 3 for list 3, and then comma second 4 for list 4. And then you can hit Enter. Now, what's going to come up is you're going to get a lot of information that summarizes the test that was conducted. The F statistic is listed first, and then the p-value, which we'll come back to in a second. Some other information that are listed, they're going to list essentially the same kind of information that would appear in a typical ANOVA table from other kinds of operations. So they'll list the factor section, the degrees of freedom, the sum of squares, the mean square error, those kind of things. And then the error section, the degrees of freedom, the sum of squares, the mean square error, and then again, some general information here. Now, the thing to keep in mind, these degrees of freedom go into our F statistic. They have to do with the degrees of freedom for that F distribution. The F distribution has 2 degrees of freedom calculations for it, and so those are listed here. And then these other calculations that are listed here are sort of sub things that you have to calculate in order to get to the F statistic along the way if you were doing this by hand. But the p-value is the main thing. Here, our p-value is 0.09. If our alpha value was 0.05, then we would fail to reject the null hypothesis. We would say all the means were equal. If we had set our alpha to 0.1, 10%, then we would be able to reject the null and say that all the means were not equal.